There's so much that you're saying in there. I was like, man, what question do I want to ask next? Because I could go 3 or 4 different ways. Um, so I want to kind of maybe talk to either the neurotypical or autistic spouse married to someone with ADHD.
Mm.
So, what might some of those kind of understandings need to be? Like, so let's pick response inhibition and sometimes blurting things out. You mentioned that that's something that you sometimes have challenges with. What does that look like? Kind of talk to the non ADHD spouse and then talk to the ADHD spouse. What's a strategy that you would help with response inhibition?
Yeah. Well, and I just wanted to, and I put this in the book, but you and I have had these conversations before we wrote this, this chapter or thought through what was important. And it's common to have one partner say, come, and you don't need a diagnosis to work with me, but we explore a lot. What are your brain's strengths, challenges? What do you think? How do you identify? And in that process, it's so common that one person will have thought they were neurotypical and the other person thought they maybe were autistic. And by the end it typically will be like the female saying, I think I have ADHD, you know, or even autism and ADHD, but more commonly, I think we all would agree that are working in this area that we're seeing like the autism or the ADHD and autism combination happening. So the strategies are interestingly the same, right? And I think that again is this great connector of, oh, we both have strengths, we both have challenges. How do we build in codes? How do we build in ways of communicating? Like, how do we be vulnerable with each other? Because that's really hard. It's scary, especially if you've been bullied out in society. And now this is the closest person I've ever had to me. That's more terrifying than somebody that lives 3 houses down or I work with, because, I really value you. And I feel scared to show you my weaknesses. So let's just say the blurting and the response inhibition, if you know that about yourself, and most neurodivergent people that I work with, right? So ASD1 or ADHD, holding a job, in a marriage, are somewhat aware of the mistakes or the, oh my gosh, I blurted out, or oh my gosh, I don't know how to jump in that conversation, or did I interrupt those people and I shouldn't have done that. Having those really transparent conversations with their partner, it enables you to build strategies, right? Before we go in, in the car conversations, before we go in here, is there anything you're worried about? Do you know who's going to be there? Do you need me to give you some topics? That's a great one for a partner that has autism. Do you want to talk through some topics you might have in common, or you might want to ask this person? And maybe for the ADHD partner, saying, if I notice that you are using like a lot of words, or you seem a little bit more intense, do you want me to tap you on the shoulder, or do you want me to come in? And maybe there's a phrase, right, that interrupts the conversation. Or do you want me to make a joke? What would feel comfortable for you? And building that almost like couples private, I say like being private detectives of each other, right? Like, and then going into the situation as a team from a strengths and challenges perspective. And hey, I've got your back.
And that is that is so hard sometimes, especially when there's been no diagnosis, no labels, and there's been a couple together for such a long time. And now we have some labels and diagnoses.
Yeah.
It'd be tempting to say one is more difficult than say the other. And so it'd be like, well, I don't want to go out to eat with you because you blurt things out and you don't sound very intelligent when you talk. Well, I don't want to go out to you because you dominate the conversation and you won't let anybody talk. That's like, okay, how do we have said and be for each other and say, okay, we're each acknowledging we've got some differences and challenges when we go into a social situation. How do we work with each other? How do we cue each other? How do we make sure, I want to make sure you're your best self. I want to make sure you're your best self. And that team approach versus it's all the autism, it's all the ADHD. that team approach is sometimes really hard to get couples on that same page, because it's so much easier to say your challenge or your issue was worse than mine. Let's focus on that.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And you know what's interesting? I've started having couples that are new. Like I just have a couple that just got married, but they worked with me before marriage. They called me and they were like, we think we're both neurodivergent. Could you like just work with us on potential problems? And we'll tell you also the ones we're already having, and we'll work together. And I thought, wow, this is such a sign of the times, first of all, right? Because I was estimating that a couple I would get before was about 10 years married before they came. Yeah, at least 10 and plus. And then we've got like the retirement generation that I have too, that is, another unique category. But when you come prior to, within a year or so of marriage or before you're married, you do have challenges, but they're not so deeply embedded, at least this is my observation, that one, we don't need as many apologies for past hurts. You're more open to, because you're kind of in that place anyway of learning who your partner is. And then asking like, okay, how do we do that? How do we build this team? Because we haven't really hurt each other and we haven't, caused harm to each other unintentionally. When you're coming and you've been in the relationship for a while is when I see a little bit of more of the, just a lot of hurt and a lot of, I don't want to use the word, I guess I'm going to say less flexibility with each other.
Yeah,
right?
because you have all these things. It's like all these things have happened. There's a pain on both sides or trauma on both sides. And while knowing the label or the difference helps, it doesn't wash away 10 or 20 years of really hard things. You can't go back in the time machine, as I say, and fix those things. Now that we know this was ADHD or this was autism, that helps in knowing your intention maybe wasn't a bad intention, but it doesn't change. I had one lady said, I'm still the girl it happened to. Still the chick that had to go through that, situation in that way. It helps knowing it wasn't intentional, but it still doesn't just automatically repair it. So we gotta, in the repair, what are we going to do in the future to, be more consistent?
And, that's a thing I've started thinking about a lot more, is just this foundational need for safety, defining safety. That's an executive function strategy. There is defining the word to make sure that we both even know what safety is. Are we on the same page? And then how are we going to regulate, and how are we going to create an environment where we can have forgiveness, where we can have apologies? I think I used to think of that regulation piece just as more intertwined with communication and executive function. And now I'm noticing more, as you grow, the longer you do something, like that's the starting place. That's the connector. Both people are somewhat dysregulated. John Gottman in his research said, if your heart rate's over 100, you're not going to have an effective conversation. Yet people will still try to have,
slow it down, take a break.
Yeah.
Breathe, people, breathe.
And that's a common element. And I think that's what you're saying in both people, and it's regardless of neurotype, all of us get dysregulated. What is that like for you? What do you need? How can, as a couple, if you're in that conversation that's getting dysregulated for either of you, how do you allow the person to walk away and trust that they're going to come back? And, oh, by the way, what's your commitment to come back? Because we have people who are like, I'm getting out of here and I'm not coming back until you never bring it up again. And if you bring it up again, I'm just going to go further. Right. And people that can go years without talking because of the fear of that one conversation or multiple conversations. I got no strategy except to leave, and I'm not going to come back. So we have to build in that. Well, what would you need to come back? What would you need to feel safe? And just really seeing each other as people that, need to feel calm and need to feel safe, and bringing emotional safety up onto a concrete plane. This is what it is. It's your tone of voice. It's recognizing each other's bids. It's having safe conflict that equals connection, rather than driving each other further away. And it's taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly why I see coaching, and you probably use different words, but that's why I see coaching counseling as three different stages for neurodiverse couples. One is education. What are we dealing with here? And let's understand each other. And sometimes I'm going to say wives, and in my situation, will get a little frustrated. It's like, okay, you just assessed him the other day, and he knows he's on the spectrum, and he's not doing any better. Like, it's been 2 weeks. The label alone did not change things, right? So there might be some processing. What does this mean about me having this label? What's me? What's the label? What's my personality? Like, we're just in stage one, right? I call it just getting on the game board with that label. And so we've got to now know what's the equipping stage? What's missing? What are the tools, accommodations? What do we need to add to the mix? And then you're building the strategies. Here's how to build the tool. Here's how to build the skill. We got to practice and give some grace for mistakes. But, education alone does not solve the problem. Okay, we know that we're different. Great. Now, what are we going to do about it and actually work on those skills? So I would say whether you're autistic or ADHD, you don't get a pass. Well, I just don't have to ever be regulated. I get to say whatever I want in a conversation because I'm, X. It's like, no. What are we going to do to build the strategies, and how do you and your spouse work together so that you're both, like you said, safe in that conversation? I want to kind of go over all the different things. We're not going to get a chance to really go as deep as I wanted to, but we do want to kind of plug the book Uniquely Us. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Robin has written. So first of all, she starts her chapter just brilliantly giving you some research and kind of telling you what executive function is. And I'll have to say it really broadened my understanding, because I didn't know some of these things fell in. I would have put them in different categories of executive function, but she is going to tell you and explain response inhibition, working memory, emotional regulation or self-regulation, task initiation, sustained attention, planning and prioritizing, organization, time management, flexibility, metacognition, self-awareness or self-directed attention, stress tolerance and resilience, and persistence, self-motivation, or persevering. All of those components make up executive function, and why there's some differences and nuances in ADHD, some differences and nuances with autism, and the nuances if a person has both. And what I love that she did, and this is why you're going to have to buy the book, she will give you that definition. She will give you so this is an example of what's happened maybe between a couple, and then she'll define these are the things that are happening here, and here's a potential strategy or a modification that you could try. It's very, and again, it started out 50 pages. So we know we did not cover everything, because we would start talking. She'd be like, what about this? And what about this? I was like, yeah, add that in. Oh, wait, we're creating this whole thing. It's getting out of hand. But I love that you define it. It's clear, and you give strategies and help put the names to it, so people know, oh, this is about priority, or this is about motivation right here, or this is about dysregulation. And all of those things do go back to the prefrontal cortex. So I guess it makes sense that they're all executive function.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious to know which ones surprised you, because I know when I was going through, I was surprised by processing speed. I don't know that I always knew that neurodivergents process differently, need more space to process. I did not realize that that was an executive function challenge.
So the stress tolerance and emotional regulation, those were surprising to me, because we think of those primarily as emotions, and then we think amygdala and we think triggers. Yeah. So, but then it makes sense with all of Wilder's work that it takes our orbital frontal cortex, our identity and our joy center, and then there's a circuit that runs from that prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. So that makes sense to me. So, I learned a lot reading your book. It formed up some things that I had seen. I was like, oh, that's the word for that. I knew I had seen that, and it looked like ABC 1, 2, 3. now she defined it and put that word on it. And now I feel like I've got some better strategies as well in working with some of my clients. So the book helped me. I get to be the benefactor of reading everybody's chapter.
Yeah.
But I loved how you did it. And I think it's so functional because in this section of the book, we're going to start out the book with what is neurodiversity and what it's not, and some of the challenges and some of the research. But then a whole big section is like, what are some things that can change? What are modifications and accommodations? And we'll have a one on social communication by an SLP. We're going to have one on what's boundaries by someone who's really good with boundaries. We have executive function with Robin here, who that's, one of her lived experience plus professional experience. We got one on co-parenting and some of the challenges there can be in co-parenting by Jeremy and Charity Rochford, who Jeremy is AuDHD and she is neurotypical. So I love the book coming from neurotypical and autistic and ADHD and AuDHD perspectives for a very broad, it's going to be very thick, y'all. So this is not an easy beach read because when you put all of this together in one book, it's pretty big. But I really enjoyed just the process. I learned so much just us getting on the phone or boxing back and forth about it. I was like, we need to put part of this conversation onto a podcast because we know we missed some things in this chapter. And Robin just has so much to offer her clients and writing. And I'm hoping she'll write her own book. It's kind of my little nefarious thing. My own agenda was to get Robin to write her own book.
We're working on it. Hopefully.
You just got to get that burst of energy when you want to stay up for 3 days.
Yes. It was great. I talked to somebody else in the ADHD field, and I was like, oh my gosh, if I could tell you, I had no idea what it required for me to write this chapter in terms of my life, like what it did to my life. And I was like, why is this so hard for me? Well, one, I'm 51. And so menopause does the whole thing to your executive functions. We haven't even touched that yet, but every friend I know in their 50s knows, because I'm like, oh, hormones impact executive function. Right. But she said to me, I was like, wow, that was such great wisdom, because writing requires, and I thought, what an impact on kids too, requires all of your executive functions at one time. It was so validating to me that my house looked like a tornado for that whole entire month, because I was like, oh, that's why I needed to just put all my executive functions over here, write this chapter. So yeah, I am excited. You have this way of encouraging and bringing people up with you, which I appreciate you so much for that. And so, yeah, I think we most certainly will see a book come out of me sooner than later.
I feel honored that I know all of you authors and know like each have your own thing you could be doing. I'm so excited to see where that's going to go now that you've written these chapters, because there's a book in each of you, I think. Although Iris would say, never ask me to write a chapter or anything again. She's like, I'm done, Stephanie. This is my one thing. I'm 70. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I've met people that have run marathons, and at the end of the marathon, they're like, I'm never doing that again. And then 2 months later, they're like training for their marathon, right? So you don't know. You don't know, Iris.
Now, do you work with primarily couples, or do you work with some adults, young adults? Kind of talk about your ideal client and your population, because we're going to tell people how to find you. But I want to make sure people they all match. So who do you work with primarily?
Primarily, I followed my business in the way that my business went. And a large part of shaping it was, colleagues and meeting people and them seeing your gifts and saying, okay, look, do you know you're good at this? And so I initially jumped into this field of coaching because I could have done therapy, but I really was enamored by coaching and how it went deeper into people's lives. It wasn't like, here's a diagnosis. It was like exactly what you were talking about earlier. Here's the challenge I have. Here's the goal. Can you tell me what it means to have autism in this? What does it mean to create accommodations for myself or a life for myself? How do I get to this goal? And my first client was a couple. And so that just led me to Grace Myhill's training and learning, like, what are you doing with couples? And then moving forward. But out of the couples work that I was doing, kind of came what my ideal client looks like. And that's either the couple as the client or one of the people in the couple's relationship. That tends to be, the bulk of the people that I'm working with, either the neurotypical or ADHD partner who's in a relationship with an autistic person, or the autistic person who wants to reach a life, has some life goals that they want to reach, and also maybe build up communication with their partner, but or executive function of their own, and take some responsibility of just their part that they can work on by themselves before going back into the couple's relationship. I do a lot of teamwork. Like I'll have, I've done this with you where you're working with one or the couple, and then I'm working with the couple or, the individual. So that's a lot of the work that I do. How young, right? Because so I thought, like a lot of people that go into coaching, I was going to work with college age people. I just expected that. I thought that's where coaching existed until I stepped into the marriage arena. And now my clients, I think the youngest person I've had is 28 and out of college, has had a job or is in the process of looking for a job, and relationships are on their radar also. So maybe not married yet, but dating, have tried dating, had long-term relationships. There may be, why didn't this go right? So even when they're coming to me for a life coaching, there seems to be that connection with relationship that I'm getting stronger and stronger and stronger at building. And I think I can't take off the relationship lens. I mean, we're meant to be into community. Most people I know want an intimate relationship, right? I haven't had a client yet who doesn't long to have that or meet the person that they want to be with. I have started, I am more than capable of working with people that have ADHD. I will get referrals for people that have ADHD. When I'm full, I will refer those out because I have a lot of colleagues who work with people that are ADHD, but not as many of us are working with people that are autistic or ADHD. So.
Okay. So how do people find you? Do you have a contact space on your website?
Yeah, there's a contact space on my website, which is robintatellc.com. And also, it's easy to remember my email because it's robintatellc@gmail.com. So everything's consistent for, brain reasons to help people out of remembering.
All right. Well, we could talk and talk. You'll of course be on again, and we'll have more conversations after the book, because hopefully as people read it and say, what about this or what about this? And it'll just generate more stuff for us to talk about once the book is launched. But I want to thank you for taking your time out today. Thank you also for writing a chapter in the book and doing it with excellence, even though I know it was very stressful at times when your ADHD kicked in and was like, no, I don't want to do this, but the deadline is coming. So thank you so much for all that you're doing for our community.
Yeah. And hey, thank you, Stephanie. I'm so glad that you reach back and pull people up. You've pulled me up. You said, look, you can do this. You can use your executive function and write a chapter. And in fact, I did. So I appreciate your encouragement. I'm excited to read this book all put together because you're right. All the Voxer conversations and the, listening to what other people are talking about. I can't wait to, just find a quiet space and open the book and read it front to back.
So I'll put this in the link. You guys listening, is because it's uniquely us, gracefully navigating the neurodiverse marriage, autism, faith, and marriage. So it also has a uniquely Christian bent. This is the first book of its kind that is autism and neurodiversity, that adds in that we're like a little smaller niche of the neurodiverse community. This kind of faith community is a little bit smaller. And so it's not being addressed. And so that's what the authors, all of the authors have a personal experience, a professional experience, and a faith experience. So I think that also makes the book special. I call it the trifecta of lived professional and faith. So we'll be closing out our time today. And I want to remind you, listeners, you are not alone on your journey, and we believe there is hope for your future.